All right, so again, we're talking about embedding the TPA. So we're going to be talking about briefly, required supports, acceptable supports, and unacceptable supports that programs should be providing to their candidates. And we're going to be talking about some synchronous and asynchronous supports that Merced County Office of Education has developed to support education specialists, mild, moderate support needs, and extensive support needs, as well as multiple subject candidates get through and work on the teacher performance assessments. So I will be checking in with the chat. If there are any questions, comments, anything as we go along, please make sure that you go ahead and utilize that. Feel free, we're a small group today. Feel free to unmute yourself and ask questions if you, or add anything to the conversation. These spaces are a collaborative space where we can all come together to be able to give each other ideas, to be able to support one another and support all candidates earning their teaching credentials here in California. So embedding the TPA, so often the teacher performance assessment is like out there, right? It's something else that someone has to do. And that's oftentimes how candidates think of it. And it's really not how it was designed to be included in programs. The teacher performance assessment should be at that space where clinical practice and coursework overlap. So candidates can be getting good support in their coursework and then being able to put that into play in their clinical practice setting, whether they be an intern, a resident, traditional student teacher, however they are completing that clinical practice requirement, we want that coursework to really overlap and support the teacher performance assessment cycles. So there are some required supports that are part of the accreditation process. And our next Digging Deeper is going to be getting more into that accreditation process. But these are all supports that the CalTPA coordinator and the programs should be and are required to offer. So the big part of this is access, right? The CalTPA coordinator should ensure that all faculty responsible for teaching a TPA has access. And this year, there was an update to the multiple subject CalTPA version 7. So it's like 7.1 in the CalTPA 2. And that's done when there is some kind of issue with a template or a document that would potentially set a candidate up for failure, right? So we want to make sure that we set candidates up for success. So please make sure that you have the most up-to-date stuff available for faculty and for candidates. Housing those assessment guides, templates, and any links to the CTC exams webpage somewhere in a clinical practice course or a seminar course is always helpful for candidates. Every week, we provide some office hours to candidates, and every week we get someone saying, I need to know how to register for this assessment. So by providing some guidance for that in their clinical practice spaces is definitely helpful. Now, for the past couple of years, we have had a fee waiver in place where candidates were able to attempt these assessments without a cost to them for registration, but that has gone away with the budget. And so ensuring that folks are registered for the correct assessment is important. They may think that and this happens, unfortunately, if someone completes like the mild, moderate support needs for CalTPA 1, and then the CalTPA 2 in extensive support needs, that's a mix, and they cannot be recommended for a preliminary credential with two different teacher performance assessments in two different areas. Or what is seen, unfortunately, is someone registers for CalTPA 1, multiple subjects in math, and then they do a literacy activity, and then do register for literacy and do a math activity. And so those will be unscorable, and the candidate would have to then re-register. So checking to make sure that the candidates know what to register for is always helpful. All right. Another required support is explaining the CalTPA to folks. And I've heard this from people, well, it's an assessment. We can't talk about it. But that's not how this was designed. It's not the kind of assessment where you study materials really, really, diligently on your own and go to a testing center and have a 2 hour window to do an assessment. This is truly a space where candidates are supposed to be working in collaboration with faculty, with mentors, with district employed supervisors, cooperating teachers. There might even be an instructional coach that's on the school site that's working with candidates. They are all supposed to come together and work together to complete this. And so there are some pieces of this assessment that really do need to be explicitly gone through. um, in one of the office hours that I was part of this, past month, a candidate came and said, does a lesson plan have to be what I record in my video? And he didn't understand that he had to submit a video of himself teaching the lesson plan. And he said that was never explicitly explained to him, and so was very frustrated. And so sometimes, and with a lot of this, we can't take for granted. Unfortunately, sometimes things that we think that people should just know, we got to make sure we explicitly tell folks. So yeah. The next piece here is looking at some examples, like looking at a mid-range submission and looking at current rubrics and going through and making sure that candidates understand that the scorers will go through the rubric starting at a level 3, and a level 3 meets the teacher performance expectations. And exceeding the standard, right, will go to a level 4 or 5, but not meeting it will go to a level 2 or a 1. And so what's important to understand is that they are analytic rubrics. So candidates need to understand they have to meet all the constructs in a level 3. They can't meet, 9 out of or 5 out of 6 of them and say, oh, I'll get a 2.5 on this rubric. It just automatically kicks them down to a 2. And so understanding those pieces, very important for candidates. And some of the resources that we do have at the end that we're going to go through help with going through these rubrics. Candidates are required to complete 12 formal observations per academic year. Sometimes interns will do 2 years or 3 years, so they do have more opportunities, but a traditional candidate that's going through a 1 year program, they're required to be observed 6 times per semester or 4 times per quarter. So for a total of 12. 4 of those 12 observations can be the TPA. They really can. And if you help the candidates line this up so that in their first, 200 hours of clinical practice, they do, TPA 1, and in their, 4 weeks of solo 400 hours, they do TPA 2, it could be a part of what they're already doing. So they're not doing all of this other work and then adding this other work on top of it, because it's a lot. And it should be part of what we're doing with candidates anyway, in that formative space where they're practicing and they're every observation should get better and better. Some advice: having candidates record all observations. It's a tedious thing. I will record this and I'll never listen to it again because I feel like my voice sounds like I'm Kermit the Frog, and I don't know, the way that it sounds in my head versus what everybody else hears, but it is hard to see yourself on camera. But it does help improve practice. And the biggest piece here to me is that candidates get comfortable with the camera, and they also understand angles of the camera, and they can see and they can hear and they can understand what the device that they're using, the limitations of it, because we don't want someone to get a condition code because they were not able to be seen or something was not able to be heard. And that just comes with, good practice. The next required support is ensuring that candidates complete the assessment within their school site. Now, there are some circumstances where folks may not be able to, like one that recently came up, like a juvenile hall facility where they have limitations on recording. Do make sure that you follow the process for the alternative method for folks to record their observation, but this is also a really good opportunity to, with your cooperating teachers, to give them that 10-hour district employed supervisor, that's training that you do every year, to give them a preview of what is included in this teacher performance assessment. And do make sure that you provide program permission slips for candidates, so that way parents know what's happening, and that you go through and talk about privacy with candidates. A lot of times in this world of, you could follow someone around town based on their posts on social media. People don't think about privacy so much, but those are people's children that are on the videos, and so they need to make sure that they are storing them in a secured environment. And there's a link here to the 10-hour district employed supervisor annual training that we were working on at Merced County Office of Education. A lot of the work that they do with their cooperating teachers is asynchronous as well as synchronous. Folks are busy, folks attend a lot of professional development, and so this is just another way that they were able to meet that requirement. Another required support here is, that formative experiences, making sure that those foundational courses, that we talk about the steps of plan, teach, assess, reflect, apply, and understand that the very first class I ever taught in a teacher preparation program, after having been instructional coach and others in other spaces, I asked the candidates to plan a lesson, bring it to class next week, and let's talk about how we could differentiate it. And I took for granted that they knew how to plan a lesson. And I had someone come with a theme that would have taken an entire semester to cover, and he was going to cover it in one lesson. And so in those foundational pieces, just don't take any piece for granted. Don't take for granted that they know that the lesson they plan needs to be the lesson that they record, kind of spaces. When candidates debrief with their faculty, ask them what went well. Ask them where they could improve, so they get used to that cycle of reflection. I think a lot of times people want to summarize and just tell you what happened, but they don't necessarily know how to, say what went well, what they could improve. And sometimes people don't see themselves. And so that's where recording an observation can be very helpful, where you may see something and they didn't necessarily see it, but so you could pull up that footage and watch it together. And in seeing themselves, it could really help to change their practice. And again here, embedding informal assessments, self-assessments, and the utilization of educational technology in their lessons. So it's not something brand new that we're doing for CalTPA. Candidates should be practicing with these different types of assessment throughout their program. And required support 6, some additional support focusing on the cycles and the rubrics. Understand what condition codes are. A lot of times the candidates say error codes. They're condition codes. Sometimes there are, it's not necessarily always an error. Sometimes it's just that they didn't have something that's legible, or couldn't hear something, or something made the submission, unscorable. So understand what those condition codes are before we submit. So that way a candidate can look at their submission and say, this might get a condition code. What do you think? And can come and talk to their faculty to ensure that their submission is their first, best, and only submission. Providing individual coaching to folks who are unsuccessful with CalTPA, looking at those condition codes, looking at the whole submission, and understanding that they have to resubmit the whole thing. Sometimes folks think they just need to resubmit one part, but it's the whole cycle together. So when they are unsuccessful, to take a look at the whole thing and make a plan. Understand scoring windows. Candidates can get this, they can turn this assessment in, any day of the year, and there are specific dates that they will get their scores by. So backwards planning, especially for folks that are, have a job offer, and they want to make sure that they are ready to be recommended, check in with those scoring windows. And just, don't wait until 11:30 on the day of you want to, upload everything to just start pulling stuff over. Make sure that you give yourself a little bit of time, because it's terrible to make a mistake uploading something or not to, or putting the same document in twice and then getting a condition code. It's so disheartening for someone that's waiting for their scores. And, meeting with those candidates before you resubmit, so that way they understand what they're supposed to do. Okay, so I did want to pause here, and those were the required supports. And the list of items that we have here are more of the acceptable supports. And so I wanted to check the chat for questions. Let me see here. Okay. So folks considering the shift from EdTPA to CalTPA, there are materials that are linked into this presentation, assessment guide, program guide, templates and such, that are like at the very end of the presentation. So you can take a look at some of those items. And then also, if you would like, you can email and contact any member of the performance assessment team, and we could discuss some of the structures of these performance assessments with you if you have any questions. So the suggestion, so Everett from St. Mary's, question was that so the reason why I had suggestion that the video recording could be part as an observation is that the candidate is planning that observation, and so they could still plan and complete that observation on the templates and through the structure that your program already has in place. But they could also be recording that and planning for it with the teacher performance assessment pieces. And so this session is specifically more for CalTPA than EdTPA. So however that would work in your program, I'm sure you could be creative and use some of the lessons that they're already doing for their requirements here. The slides should have been shared out in the chat. Hopefully folks got them there. And yeah, no, and Kathleen, your question about acceptable supports and what's, helpful to have some questions. When I went through some of these acceptable supports, gave some it's actually kind of, I usually try to stick with like the positive, but sometimes it's better to just say what's not acceptable, right? Like list out what folks cannot do. Like you can't edit someone's submission for them. You can't say that this part is what you should submit of your video. And so maybe just going through with folks of what they can't do and say everything else is fair game. But it's really a coaching conversation. You want to draw out from the candidate what they think went well, what they think according to the rubrics. And in some of the documents that we'll share from Merced County Office of Ed, there is a rubric breakdown where all the rubric constructs are turned into questions. And so sometimes those questions might be helpful for cooperating teachers and mentors. I can't tell you how many times I got I never had to do a TPA. I have no idea how to do a TPA from cooperating teachers. And so by using that rubric breakdown, it helps with some of those questions. Does that answer that piece, or were you looking for something else?
Oh no, I really appreciate this is the biggest issue that we have for our supervisors. And yes, what they can't do is helpful, but what they really want to know is like what would help them so much is to have like just more examples of questions that they can ask because they want to do it correctly, but they don't want to cross that line between, saying something like, so what are a general question without it being too leading, like just to help see that clear definition between what is an acceptable type of question and what is one that is too leading for it. Because telling them what they can't do is not as helpful as giving them, like, because if they had a list of questions that they could, if they see something, here's an acceptable way for me to ask that question, that would be super helpful to have.
Okay, if you all don't mind, I might just skip ahead and just because of the question came out. If you well, of course I did that. But so I'm gonna go ahead and just skip to this real set and then we'll come back to it. But let me see current slide. Like that's why I said, of course I would click on this and it would take me to the wrong thing. So this is like for a multiple subject CalTPA, and this was the rubric breakdown. And what this document is literally a screen grab, a screenshot of the level 3 and the full contract, but the questions are for a level 3. And so the first contract saying candidates lesson planning includes manageable, grade level, appropriate content specific learning goals of the lesson that clearly build on students' prior content knowledge. That's a lot, right? So now, does the candidate's lesson plan include manageable, grade level, appropriate content specific learning goals? If so, what are they? And so the candidate can copy and paste from their submission into this box. And then they can say, does the lesson clearly build on the prior content knowledge? If so, how? And so it's just taking these constructs and turning them into good questions here. So that way the mentor can help support the candidate as they go through and build out their rubrics. And then also, um, when as a CalTPA coordinator, when I was going to meet with a candidate about their final submission, I'd have them fill this out. So that way I'm not digging through their submission. I'm getting the information that they gave me so I can coach them on what they put here as their evidence. Is that what you were asking, or is that helpful, or
Yeah, yeah, yes. It's just I feel like this can't be something that's unique to us up here. And this seems like, and I saw that someone said a great session for above. Yeah, I would love to just see additional supports provided for this because basically I'm having to come up with lists of questions that can help them. And if this is something that we're having to do, certainly others are too. And so it'd be nice if there were some like wider resources.
Mhm. Okay, thank you. Okay. I'm sorry, I was kind of just chit-chatting about these questions and I want to just make sure I catch up with anything in the chat. Thank you, Heather, for including the link to that other digging deeper. Oh yeah. Yeah, definitely Gay included something that sounds like a great session for our Meredith Fellows. Um, brainstorming questions, putting them together, supporting other programs. That's what a lot of this space is about, is coming together as programs and kind of workshopping through some of these concerns and issues. Yeah. Okay. 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 Sorry. Just reading through questions. Okay. Yes, there is the rubric breakdown for all of these pieces. It's at the end of the session, and I don't want to take too much of the wind out of Cristal's sails. She's excited to be here today to present the work that they've worked on. So let me go ahead and go back. Okay. Are there any other questions or comments before I go through some of these acceptable supports and some suggestions on some things to do? Okay. So another acceptable support is referring candidates to the CalTPA glossary. It's very challenging for candidates, especially new to this first semester. There's a lot of vocabulary, terms, acronyms, letters that people put together that make absolutely no sense. And so understanding the definition of some of these terms is so important, and making sure that everybody's speaking, a common language. Um, Providing candidates with examples of effective teaching, modeling well-written lesson plans and unit plans, watching videos of teachers putting these things into practice, and then taking the rubric and scoring a video of a teacher teaching. And so the candidates can see how that process works, or even looking at a lesson plan and scoring it and seeing how it might uh, do on the CalTPA. Writing workshop. This is always a spot of contention around the acceptable supports. But yes, we can help edit someone's submission for grammar, for spelling, for professional writing. I was an English teacher for a long time. It's amazing to me how many people don't put capitals at the beginning of sentences and end marks and such when they're doing formal writing. And another piece here is, especially for those of you at, IHEs or institutes of higher education, there's often tutoring centers available to your candidates. Go make an appointment with those folks. Explain to them what this assessment is, what these templates look like, and how they can help folks. They are very, very helpful, and they want to make sure that they are supporting all candidates. But by taking a quick trip over there, setting it up, telling the candidates, hey, go talk to so and so over at the tutoring center if you need support with writing. It's always helpful. Some more acceptable supports. Providing some specific assistance, right, for a demonstrated need for improvement. And, faculty mentors and cooperating teachers are often the person or the people that are the closest. They see those candidates on a regular basis in the space that they're in. And people oftentimes can talk a good game when they show up to class about all the things that they would do, could do, have done, but not necessarily are able to implement. And so that's why these folks that see the candidates in the field are the closest to them and can give them the best support, and often have a lot of that trust built already, where they can have these conversations collaboratively to support folks. Explaining the scoring rubrics, I talked about that a little bit before, but just understanding like how they flow, understanding why there are so many of them. There's a lot, teaching is a complex process. And in order to set folks up for success, these rubrics are, in different sections, and looking at where the evidence can be found. Because when the assessors get this submission, they are only allowed to look in certain places to mark evidence that meets that rubric construct. So understanding that a candidate, well, I put it in step one. Why'd they give me a one in step four when it was there? Well, they're only allowed to look in certain spaces. So just make sure that you explain that to candidates. And um, the last piece here is linking content to experiences in the preparation program. Again, very explicitly naming where these experiences are coming from. We can't take anything for granted with a candidate, making sure that they understand what they're supposed to do. Some more acceptable supports is scheduling a time for completion. I used to have, when I was at UC Merced, shout out to UC Merced, we would start in their first class and lay out how the program was going to flow and where certain things needed to live and what the time frames. And so a candidate who maybe had a event going on, they were going to get married, or they knew they had something, and they knew that the month of March was going to be tough, so they could make their own plans, because that's one of the good things about the teacher performance assessments. There's flexibility as to when they can be completed. but we know that if you put it off for tomorrow, tomorrow does not necessarily have more time in it. So understanding that, attacking these things, early and at a pace can help alleviate some of that anxiety and stress for folks because they are backwards mapping. Check-in meetings, checking in on a regular basis, discussing those timelines, understanding that they creep up on you. And it's funny to believe that it's like October 10th already. My goodness, it was just August and the weather hasn't helped with being so hot. It makes me feel like we're in July still. But, 2024 is coming to a close very quickly. So, moving with candidates, checking in with them, always helpful and important. And co-planning an instructional segment with a cooperating teacher, understanding what co-planning is. I once had a candidate who thought that co-planning meant that the cooperating teacher was supposed to do this for them and hand it to them, and then they were going to go teach it. That's what co-planning was. But um, as I would often tell when I was an instructional coach at the middle school, I would tell them, tell teachers, you already completed middle school, right? You're a teacher. It's now the kids' turn to do the work. And so as the faculty, as the mentor, you've already completed this work. Now it's their turn to demonstrate their competence. So understanding that co-planning means that we're going to talk about things, we're going to spitball and come up with ideas. They might say, oh, I was thinking about doing this. Oh, well, now I have this resource here for you. That's that collaborative spirit of co-planning. And a lot of times, again, not taking anything for granted. That one candidate who was, well, I never got when we were asking him for their 4 weeks of solo lessons. Well, the cooperating teacher never gave it to me, so how could I turn it in? Well, that's your job. You're taking over that class. You're the teacher. You have to make the plans. And again, like I said, I took things for granted when I was new in this role. Um, some more acceptable supports, translations of instructional materials. Those are available to folks through the supports in the website, and for candidates, especially if they're completing their world languages and such. And candidates don't have to translate their submissions, like their videos. They could submit in the language that they completed in, but the templates are done in English. Paraphrasing, answering questions. This goes to the questions that people to ask, creating a frequently asked questions page, a space where candidates, time, office hours or what have you, where candidates can have a lot of these questions answered, and then allowing for folks to self-assess their draft responses. And that rubric breakdown was a really strong place for folks to be able to self-assess, so they can say, yeah, I have this, and how, and look at it, and is it enough? And going through those pieces yourself first is important before you hand it to someone else. So that way it's it's like when you're learning something new and you show up and you've not read the book and you don't know anything, your questions are not going to be very specific or very strong, right? But if you are learning something and you're along the way and now you have some very good specific questions, then you would be able to use that collaboration time more effectively. Acceptable supports 5, answering some common questions, have the regularly scheduled hours, using class time to allow candidates to support each other. I found, especially when working with interns, they don't have time anywhere else. It's all tucked away into very specific buckets. And so by allowing folks time in class to check in with one another, whether they're in person or in some type of a breakout room on a synchronous Zoom, um, it's an important space to make, so that way folks can be set up for success. Um, Now, this was another piece for a lot of interns, those 144 hours of general support and 45 hours of EL support. Some of those resources and support time can be CalTPA prep and resources that are, because those hours are supposed to be in partnership with the district and with the program. And so having weekly general support hours and EL support hours for candidates and pointing them to some resources is always helpful to to support them through their programs. So another piece here, and this was a question that came through in the chat, is, making sure, how to use some of the materials and uploading. This is technical assistance. It can be a pain, especially when a candidate is trying to edit a video. Understanding, like, and it was interesting. We had a faculty member come to office hours and say, like, what do we suggest for creating video clips? And there are so many different platforms out there to provide that technical assistance. So checking in with IT departments, having and pointing candidates to, IT departments, maybe if there are some type of student assistants that are at your university where candidates can bring a video clip and learn about making those continuous unedited clips for their TPA. I would also say that folks on campuses, there are a lot of other resource people that are available, like in the library and in IT, that can help a candidate with editing and creating those clips. But one thing I will I will say is one of the worst things that I saw was a candidate who had this video and it was ready to go, and she made one clip and deleted the whole rest of the video and couldn't get it back and had to re-record. And so I would just advise to candidates, make a copy and leave that copy somewhere else. Then make a copy to pull a clip. So that way they'll have their original copy just somewhere that they are storing it. And do make sure that as candidates are, if just in case they, we want their first submission to be their only submission, but they do need to retain copies of all of their materials. It's very challenging, if not impossible, to get back their submission items from the technical contractor. So if they can create a folder on their desktop or in some kind of a storage, Google Drive or box or what have you, with all of their documents and their videos, that would be very helpful. Unfortunately, for some folks, they don't have that video anymore, or they don't have access to it, and they have a condition code in a section that's other than video. They may be required to do it all again. And so just making sure that they have that stuff stored somewhere. A quick question came in. The candidates do not upload the entire video. They do the clips separately. And there is some documentation in the supports that Cristal and I are going to be talking about that help with organizing those videos and annotations. There are some CalTPA rules of participation here. Going through those with candidates, making sure that they understand. Something that was kind of sad that happened in a program that I saw was two candidates, so they worked together, they collaborated, and they did the exact same submission. And so and it got flagged because there is originality pieces. So candidates need to make sure and understand that they need to do, while they can do something, in the same realm, it just cannot be identical. Their submissions will get flagged. So these are these unacceptable supports, things that we can't do. But so before we go into these unacceptable supports, let me go ahead and see if there's anything in the chat or any questions or concerns or anything that anybody would like to bring up around acceptable supports, or any suggestions that you have had. Jude Wolf.
Yeah. Hi. Can you guys hear me? Sorry.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you so much. I mean, I just have to just give you a shout out because I've been to some of your presentations over the summer and your materials have been so helpful as I tried to go through my first cohort, supporting my cycle 2 folks in mild moderate. So really super helpful with your all of these materials. My question is, as I really coach them into really focusing on step 1 and step 2, because that is the crux of their work, and leading into step 3 and 4, the issue that I'm having to bring back to their attention is that there's that step 4 analysis where they also still have to videotape, right? So it's not like, okay, well, you videotape your 3 to 5 lessons, you pick your video clips, and then, oh, by the way, you still have to videotape your 6th lesson of reteach or extension. So I'm just wondering, I mean, I know it's probably not in the acceptable supports, except, unacceptable supports genre category of our discussion right now, but I was wondering if you could address that at some point today.
No, and that's actually the one of those things that's kind of stinky because the candidates, especially ones that go and teach it and then leave it and put it in a drawer for like a few weeks and then go back to it and be like, oh my goodness, I have this other video. So talking about it very much in advance and say, okay, this has to be done at a pace because you want to be able to provide feedback to kids, actionable feedback that can move them forward in learning. And so understanding that, I was an English teacher. Every time I gave an assignment, I got 120 of them back. And I had to understand that, to be able to make that real, like I had to have time to grade it, score it, and give it back to kids at a pace. And so recognizing what parts and using those rubrics really helped support me as a teacher so I could, provide that actionable feedback to students and get those. And I'm a pretty quick reader, so I could get through. And I learned to have kids make oral presentations too, to score them right there on the spot. But talking to the candidates about that actionable feedback and understanding that they need to move through this at a pace so they can get to that last video and it can mean something because it's so important for it to mean something and move the students further along. So I think when you talk about CalTPA 2, do like an overview. This is the whole thing. Let's get a big picture. We're planning the party, we need the date, we need the location, kind of thing. And now we'll get down to, the nitty-gritty. But understanding that that last video is there because you don't want it hanging out as a surprise.
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you, Marissa. And I have another question really quickly around, you had mentioned embedding the university supervision for cycle 2 and giving those, those 4 videos or 4 contact points with the university supervision and discussing the TPAs around that. And we are doing that, so that's yay. The issue that one of the supervisors brought up was that it doesn't, it doesn't provide that feedback time, right? So like typically you would wait, you give them feedback, and then you'd wait like a couple of weeks, and then then you would see them again. So if this is the instructional unit, you don't, like you said, it's not 2-3 weeks, it's days. How do
Right.
you address that with your supervisors? So if embedding it that way.
Right. And so that is often an issue because you want to go from one observation to the next and see improvement and get that cycle. And
Yeah.
so understanding that, as best you can to have the video clips and the lesson plans be in a sequence, and perhaps the person would make that plan and maybe it would count for one observation or two, not all 4 or 3 or something of that nature. And the programs, you do have the freedom to be able to structure your observations in such a way that makes sense that you can justify to when you explain that to your accreditation cycle. You could say, will we do 2 in this week? And we recognize it's supposed to be every 3 weeks, but we're doing 2 very, very focused. We spend a lot of time in preparation for it, and we are making sure we're getting to feedback in person right away or via Zoom right away. So that way the candidate can take that and make those decisions, the next day. So it's really up to your structure and what you see as successful. I always found it to just be a successful space for candidates to be able to include, especially in that 4 week solo when they are on their own and they need a lot of support. And I had more than one candidate that just was completely overwhelmed, because going from being that friendly hanging out student teacher in the back to being the person that's in charge of the class is challenging. So having more structured pieces during that time is never a bad thing. And if they can get a twofer for it and be able to do teacher performance assessment work as well as get that really strong mentorship, it's always helpful. But I do recognize that tension of the structure of observations and seeing improvement. But again, it's a very condensed time, and so by condensing pieces in there, it could make good sense for your candidates. All right. So, oh, Sally, apologies.
Hi, Marissa. How are you doing?
Well, and you?
Good, thank you. I want to thank you so much for providing today's session. We're getting ready. I'm from USC, and this is our first go at the CalTPA. So my faculty has been harassing me with a lot of questions about acceptable support. So this presentation is very timely. So I do want to ask you if there will be more lesson samples made available for us, because what I've been provided so far was an art lesson and then some cycle 2 materials. Will there be anything else that we can take a look at for cycle 1?
Let me get back to you on that one, because part of the problem with our mid-range submissions, we do have those available in the faculty support, is they have to be ADA compliant and some of those pieces. And so we are working on getting some more mid-range submissions out to folks. And so I will work on that. And I know that there's a few folks on the call here, but I don't want to call anybody out. But if you want to send me an email through our inbox, hopefully we can get some of those pushed out and update you all when they are available in the PSD.
That would be great. So what email address could somebody write that in the chat for me real quick? Yeah, the sample lessons would help a lot, because we're just trying to get the faculty all, on the same page and everything. I do have one more question, if you don't mind. So again, this is our first go at the CalTPA. So we are also determining how to do the whole remediation process. I don't know if you're going to cover this today, but what if our term 2 students aren't passing cycle 1? Do we continue to let them through for the final term, and do we let them do the cycle 2 with the rest of their cohort? What suggestions do we have? We have no idea what to do.
My suggestion is to allow folks to continue to stay with their cohort, but give targeted feedback. So because sometimes a reason a candidate did not necessarily complete to standard is something very simple that they can adjust, and sometimes it's a condition code. I had a candidate did a great job at all of her stuff, but she was fancy and put video clip 1 above her head, and it came out as an edit. And so something like that, she just really needed to take a step back and fix that, and was able to move forward. But because it has to be an unedited video, that's the condition code she got. Someone that has more issues with specific parts of pedagogy or lesson delivery, maybe something was unsafe in their video that flagged, it's very much so a case by case basis, and that's where that remediation process of meeting with someone, reviewing condition codes, reviewing rubric scores, and making a plan for that person can be very helpful. Oftentimes, like, folks complete CalTPA 1 in fall and then CalTPA 2 in spring. And so you don't want to have those run into each other and cause a lot of extra anxiety for folks. So that's why I think that remediation meeting checking in with someone, seeing what's going on, checking in with them before they submit. So that way, if that's what taught me to watch video clips with candidates before they submitted, because I could have easily said, yeah, that's going to be a condition code. Do you have the other video? And she would have been like, yeah, I do. And then she could have submitted that the first time around. And it was a lesson that I learned with candidates. And that there's one of the documents in the support that's an annotation organizer where I had candidates actually put their clips there. So that way we could watch them together and I could ask them, what do you think? How did this do? Take a look at your rubrics. Where did you score? So that way you could try to head some of that stuff off.
So just to be clear, we can look at the actual materials they will be submitting, but to be very, strategic about the feedback that we give them. Is that correct? So we can actually look at the actual materials. I just want to be completely clear.
Oh yeah, you can look at what they submit, but you can't tell them what to submit. The big thing, you don't want to have someone show you a 45-minute clip and say, what do I turn in? And you say, well, I think this part for part 1, this part for 2, and this part for 3, and here's your annotations. Like, that's not what you do. But what you can do is say, the candidate says, this is what I plan to submit, and here are my annotations. And you could coach them, ask them questions. Do you think that this meets the rubric construct? How do you think it meets the rubric construct? And having those kinds of conversations with folks, it pulls it out of them. And if you say, do you think this meets, practice that face, that you're not giving them, yeah, that feedback. So that way they can, I have to work on that poker face because I'm always like, yeah, or I don't know, you want to work on those pieces. So that way but you're supporting the candidates by, and then also having them watch things of each other too. A lot of times you don't have to be the only person that watches their videos. They can get into a group of 2 or 3 and watch each other's videos and give each other good feedback. And again, those are all things that candidates should be doing on a regular basis before they submit. So that way it's their first, best, only submission.
That was very clear and helpful. Thank you.
All right. Let's see here. Okay. Yeah, thank you, Heather, for the EdSped. That's in version 3, so that's year 3, and that's what that means for some of you folks that don't. That the version is the year that it's in, and every year there are iterative changes. We do take a look at scores across the state, and we get feedback from spaces like this, and make some of those adjustments to support candidates. Sometimes things as simple as like a verb change can change how a submission is scored, and so it's important to make sure that we do those pieces. Okay. All right. I don't really like these unacceptable supports. They are literally copied and pasted from the website. And I don't give you examples of what not to do, just like telling kids, don't run, right? We tell them to walk. So we'll talk about the acceptable supports and required supports, and I'll leave you to kind of read some of these unacceptable supports. But like I said, telling a candidate what to submit, uploading their stuff for them. I had a candidate that sent me his stuff and said he was too busy, and he sent me his login and asked me to upload it for him. I was like, that's wonderful for you. I'm pretty busy too. So that's not going to happen today. But making sure that the candidates understand what are unacceptable, so they don't feel like they should be getting something from their program. And I've looked around on different websites and Facebook, social media. There are a lot of people out there that for $3,000 will guarantee you'll pass this or that. Candidates should not need that. They should be able to get everything they need from the source, from you, their program, and make sure that they could be aware of some of those unacceptable places to get support. Yeah. Okay. So, like I said, Cristal is here today. I transitioned to the CTC in June, July of this year, and Cristal came on, but we've worked together for many years at UC Merced, and before that, she's one of the best teachers I know, and I'm very, very happy to have her come today and talk about some of these pieces and these spaces. She is new to this work as well, and always ever evolving and always learning. So hopefully folks have access to this. I tried to make it like a Google link and so hopefully you have access to this, but I'm going to go ahead and click on it. And sorry if it looks funky. I'm still getting used to trying to use a PC. But let's go ahead and Cristal, which one would you like to click on? Any one of these, or you want me to pick?
I'm thinking it would be probably good to kind of talk a little bit about the education specialist cycles. We know that there's a lot of information out there. It's very robust for multiple subject, but we do end up with a lot of folks who have questions on the EdSped pathways for the TPA. So I think that would be a good place to start.
Okay. So are you good with maybe mild, moderate support needs CalTPA 2?
That sounds great.
Okay. So this document here that you're seeing is a Google Doc, and I realize I did not link this. Of course, I would put on the screen the thing I messed up, but I promise I will put that in there. But and let me go ahead and for those of you that are, let me grab access to this. Let me share. Link done. So that way you have access to this specific document. But what this document is and what it can be is either a synchronous or an asynchronous support that can be provided to candidates. This would be, I'll show you in another one, but this would be an overview. So that concern about that fourth or that fifth video in step 4, this would talk about that. So you can do an overview. But what I did as a CalTPA coordinator is use these kind of slides, and I recorded myself making these presentations and linked them here. So that way, if I ever needed to bring on a new faculty member or support a candidate or what have you, they would have a video of me presenting this just continuously. And so I linked in the assessment guide, the program guide, and this is that rubric breakdown that I was talking about. And again, it's just literally a screenshot of the rubric and then going through and asking some questions and making sure that the candidate can put their evidence here so they can self-assess. Do they have enough evidence to meet the construct of the rubric? And one thing I did in class is I would give the candidates the rubric and I wouldn't give them this stuff yet. I would put them in groups, partners or small groups, and have them try to break down the rubrics themselves so they get a chance to look through, deeply read, because oftentimes they wouldn't unless I provided that time and space in class. And it just seems like wild to me that folks wouldn't read the instructions on how to complete such a high stakes component of their program that's so deeply embedded. But, you know, it's, again, can't take stuff for granted from folks. So having the candidates go through, read these pieces, come up with their questions, and then, you know, put them into that productive struggle so they can come and then compare it to what you see. And this is just the way that I saw it. And all I did was try to get each construct and say does, do, or how. And so that way the candidates could put the evidence here. And as an assessor, that I was an assessor for English CalTPA 2. That's what the assessors do. They read the submission, they look in the parts where they are allowed to find evidence, and they take a screenshot or grab it and put it into a folder and say this is how they can justify a score of 3 or 4 or 5 for a candidate because they have these pieces. Cristal.
So I know we said that we can use this tool, right, as a self-assessment tool that a candidate can use for their own submission. This would also be a great activity if you're asking your candidates to look at a submission, right, an example, and they can work in groups and use this rubric breakdown and sort of assess, you know, the video clip that they're watching. So that's another option. It doesn't only have to be a self-assessment of their own submission.
Right. So those mid-range submissions that we are working on getting out to you, or the ones that we do have available, having candidates go through and score and find evidence is always a way to support them as they are working through. Each one of these has a little slideshow with some the preamble. A lot of times we skip that front matter. Let me just get to what I got to do. But it's important to call that out, understand what this is, where it fits, what is asset-based instruction, and there has been an update to the universal design the UDL guidelines. There's a 3.0 out there, so it's linked in here, so you could take a look. This is just a screenshot of what is that, but it's Gay always calls it is it the 5,000 foot or 10,000 foot evidence table? But just a overview of what's going to be in there. Some connections between cycle 1 and 2. They're intended to build on one another, and sometimes there's stuff that candidates have to complete in cycle 1 that they can bring over to cycle 2. Please make sure that they don't just drop the same template. They do need to copy and paste it into the new template. Yeah. Dr. Sykes.
Hey, thank you so much for this presentation. It's super helpful. I have a question on the last comment you made, that, cycle 2 built on cycle 1. For our year 1 candidates, we are, based on CTC guidance, advising them to focus on math cycle this year in preparation for the LPA next year. Do we foresee that there'll be any impact, given that they're really that is their TPA for this year?
No, and it's a very good thing to have folks do cycle 1 math this year,
okay,
and then LPA next year. They are designed to kind of because planning one lesson and then planning a unit is, the next step. But sometimes it makes sense to do cycle 2 before you do cycle 1, especially like a spring start of someone, and or someone that's doing something. Maybe they're doing both TPAs in the same semester, and it's in the spring, and we know about spring break, and we know about testing schedules and such. And so maybe it makes more sense to do CalTPAs in different order. So it's really a program sponsor
okay,
decision, but especially when you're looking at those contextual pieces, if you're working with the same group of kiddos, a lot of that stuff you already did, so you can just move it over. But in the same way, if you already did it for cycle 2, you can bring it back over to cycle 1. So they do have those pieces that are in common. But yeah, no, the focusing on, if you're in especially a 2-year program, and Heather, I think you're here, you may want to speak to this one a little bit, but yeah, focusing on CalTPA 1 in math, and then the LPA next year, right?
Right. And so the reasoning for that is that if they were to take CalPA cycle 1 in literacy and potentially not receive a passing score, they would not have the option to take that once we move into the July 1st, 2025 window, where they have to take CalTPA 2 in literacy.
got it.
Maybe be in a position where they would have to retake a cycle they've already taken, in order to have the math literacy components met in the assessment design standards. And we don't want to put candidates in that position. So it's best to have them complete it in math. So that way, if hopefully they won't be, right? We want, again, as Marissa has said, that first submission to be the best and only submission that they're turning in. And the data seems to be trending more and more in that direction. So it's really great. And so hopefully that will be what happens. But on the off chance that, they get a condition code, they miss the passing standard, we don't want them to be in a place where they have to complete everything.
Got it. All right. Thank you both for that explanation. That was helpful.
All right. So basically all of these these are some digital slides. Merced County Office of Education has been very, very generous with their stuff. They're happy to share, take what you'd like. A lot of it is very simple, basic So you can change it to your colors and embed it into your classes. Another document that is in here is this annotation organizer. And I was speaking to this a little bit earlier when I talked about making your video clips. So what I had candidates do when I was an instructor was make their video clips and link them here. And then, the start time, end time, the annotation title, and then what they were going to say about that space and time that they are documenting what they were doing. And what was helpful for me, and I know it looks like an Excel thing. I'm not good with Excel. I do Word documents, but what's helpful for me is just to have everything in one place. So that when they go to upload and they're in that high stress, putting their stuff into Pearson, getting ready to submit it, that it's all there. They're not having to type into a box. They can do their count on their words, or and so they can make sure that they are not putting too much and they're following, the requirements. And so it's all here. And then also, if you wanted to, this could be an assignment that candidates complete in a class, and they could meet together, maybe in groups of 2 or 3. I wouldn't put them in much larger groups than that, because then you're watching a whole lot of videos, but they could look at each other's videos, talk about the annotation titles. Maybe there was something that they saw in another person's video that you can put another annotation in there that might strengthen the submission. And so, and have them watch this with their cooperating teacher as well. So that way they can get some good feedback from some of those folks as to what they put into those annotations. So it was always a way to help the folks create those clips, to practice creating those clips, putting them in one space, and being able to review things. And again, had I that one candidate who put above her head, video clip 1, if I would have seen that, I would have said, don't do that. That's $150 down the drain. And it was something that I learned myself to just check in with folks. And again, they made their clip, they made their annotation, they chose their annotations, they made their titles. We talk about the rubrics. Does this meet the requirements of the rubric? And if you ask that question to a candidate and they say, yes, I think it does because, right? That is you coaching. That is you having a good conversation and having them come up with the evidence. We're not telling them this. If you say, I think this annotation title because of this, right? That's getting on the unacceptable, right? But if they say, I think this annotation title because of this, and you say, yeah, I agree with you. Yeah, that is you did a really nice job of providing content specific feedback to that student. You said more than just great job, kid. That right there is feedback that we can give them because they already said they were doing that. So you can affirm what they are doing. So, and then there is another little annotation organizer for that last little clip. So by pulling this out and explaining that there is another clip, you will have to annotate it. It's called follow-up instruction where learning occurred, and explaining that to the candidates in the beginning is always very helpful. So that way they have a big picture of what this is and they bring it down to the step-by-step process. All right, Cristal, anything to add about these pieces?
Yes. So a lot of you are probably going to find a lot of value in specifically the rubric breakdowns and the annotation organizers. The other thing that I wanted to point out is that those templates for each part, if you notice, if you've taken the time to kind of click through them, they're pulled straight from the TPA. These are things that we don't have to make from scratch. We can ask our candidates to work on these templates on their own or in groups. But again, at the end of the day, what their final submission is, we don't want when they're submitting their final assessment to be the first time they're looking at these, official items. So these are things that we can share with templates or with our candidates ahead of time. And the templates are a good example of that.
To go along with that, a candidate who was successful at completing his CalTPA once told me that he used to take all of his notes on one set of templates and then actually complete the TPA on another set of templates. So that way he could scribble on, he either printed stuff out or digitally did this, circled things, pointed to things. So that way, when he was going through, he had that good set of notes from the template that he could utilize in completing. A quick question that came in is, conjecturing. To me, and maybe I could get some help from other commission staff here. When I see conjecturing, is to take a look at their document and saying, I think that this is a 3. Whereas when someone else says, I think this is a 3 because, and then they tell you, and then you say, yeah, I agree with you. Does that doesn't, Heather, I saw that you're unmuting yourself, so I'm hoping you're helping me on this one.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I was agreeing with what you were saying, and that conjecturing is really kind of saying like, oh, you're definitely going to pass, or this is absolutely scoring a 4. That type of thing would be conjecturing on their performance requirements or their evidence. And that would be falling under the unacceptable supports.
But you would agree with me that if a candidate came to you with documentation and said, I think this is this, and then you say yes?
And you can say, yeah, that looks like a good, piece of evidence that you could use for that. But you wouldn't say you're definitely going to score a 3 or you're definitely going to pass for sure.
And you can always provide feedback grounded in the rubric, looking at the rubric together and giving them feedback, just using that rubric as a way so that you don't spew outside the lines, just using that as a basis. And then, you can always just kind of help them reflect as well and sort of coach them.
And Cristal just put a great similar response to what Julie just said in the chat, that she's asked candidates, and looking at this portion of the rubric, where is your evidence? What do you think? And having them map it back to their own evidence. So doing that kind of self-assessment piece definitely works as well. So you can give them some affirmation without giving them some conjecture regarding their score. You can do that, but definitely no scoring their submission saying, yep, this is going to get a 25.
Does that answer, Kathleen?
Yeah, that's better. It's just, but that's where a lot of our difficulty comes in when it comes to not trying to word sleuth for the sake of word sleuth, but wanting to make sure, because especially last year was my first year as a university supervisor, and it was also, I'm not from California, so it was my first year even with any experience with everything. And in retrospect, especially now that I'm taking on coordinator roles and it's my job to train the supervisors, I know where I probably crossed the line, especially when it comes to some of these things, just from that first year learning experience. Nothing egregious, nothing, but it's one of those, but it's especially when trying to really clarify what is acceptable, what's not, and not just from a don't do this sort of thing. But I think a question like that is, I've asked, that type of question is one that you could ask literally for every single thing and then fall in a safe category, because that's a lot of what they're wanting are safe things to ask, not necessarily I can say don't give them answers, but what are the good types of questions? So that's a great helpful source. So thank you.
Jude.
Yeah, hi. This conversation really leads me to thinking about the kind of mental health well-being of our candidates at this moment. I think they are because of the higher stakes nature now of this test, that they have to pay $150 for every cycle that they apply, and if they don't pass, then they have to resubmit and pay again. And they are wanting just okay, well, what do you think? It's almost we're dealing with adults here, but at the same time, there's that little kid in them that just wants to say, please tell me that I'm going to pass. And I'm really compassionate around that, because I think this should make sense, but I've got 25 plus years in this thing, so I'm trying to have a beginner's mind, have a bit more compassion around their struggles, and really trying to cultivate more of their you know this, you can do this, and we all know that. I just wanted to, from a coordinator standpoint, because I know that like when I'm at Friday night, when I'm trying to answer yet, just like Heather, when I email her, I'm like, okay, this is a stupid question. This is a tough question, but can you just help me? So anyway, I appreciate all of you guys'
There are no
support
stupid
and
questions
having this
about this,
again.
Jude. No stupid question.
I know. It's like, oh yeah, duh, that was okay. That's a duh question, but okay, thank you for your patience. But just really helpful, and this is really helpful. I've been sitting in these rooms over and over and over again. It's never enough to, because when candidates ask me questions, I'm like, okay, wait, I know I should know that, but just a second, so anyway, thank you so much.
No,
Jude,
absolutely. I think, oh, go ahead, Tris. I'm sorry.
that's okay. I was just going to say, Jude, you bring up a really good point. And, we can offer this to candidates in a structured format, through our clinical practice course or something like that. But some candidates, they need that extra attention. They need that human touch. I mean, there's nothing wrong with, gathering a small group into a Zoom session, for those few that have, just more questions and just kind of talking them through it, talking to them about the rubrics and showing these templates and things like that. So sometimes that's something we need to do for some of our candidates. And I work with interns. So if you know anything about interns, they need quite a bit of support. So, I'm glad that you bring that up, because that is an important piece that maybe sometimes we kind of forget about. But yeah, the emotional part is huge.
Yeah, and I was just gonna make a joke because I saw this meme and it was like, I'm at 13 years old and I don't want you to tell me what to do. And like you're at 27, you're like, can you please, in order, just exactly tell me what I'm supposed to do? And it's that mindset. And everyone is a different learner. And I've had candidates where I handed them asynchronous stuff and they just went and turned it in, and passed on their first. And then there's the others where they make appointments and they show up to every single office hours and ask lots of questions. And they have that, sometimes they have that feeling, that doubt within themselves, that imposter syndrome that I'm not good enough or I can't do this. And so I think, as in supporting new teachers, as much as we can, pump them up as they can do it. You guys these are challenging things. We can do challenging things. We're going to do them together. Together, we're going to work on this, and we're a team, and I'm going to support you in every way that I can. But it is your turn. It's your turn to show what you can do. And one time I had a candidate that was really, really complaining about an activity they did in a science and math class, and but she came back later and went to the instructor that she gave a lot of bologna sandwiches to, and thanked her because they asked her a very specific math science question in her interview, and because she knew the good answer, she was hired for a position. And so she came back to class and told that instructor, thank you, because I was able to, now I have this job. And one candidate told me that through his experience, that he got a question in a job interview as to what he would do in a certain situation, and he was able to pull from the experience he had through the plan, teach and assess, reflect, apply experience in his CalTPA, and was able to get a job. And we know when you're in the job interview, a lot of times people they talk and you can tell if they know what they're doing and not. And so a lot of times, especially for new candidates, these are really formative experiences for them as they move into their career. And it's not the end. You can let them know there's a lot more support as folks continue to go through. They complete these teacher performance assessments and program, develop those individualized development plan IDP, and move into induction. And that it just keeps moving, and the support, is going to continue to be there. So, any other questions, or did I miss anything in the chat? Any other comments?
I have a question.
Yes.
So at the very beginning of the meeting, you mentioned with the multiple subject cycle 2 CalTPA, there had been a revision and it was now 7.1. Could you tell me specifically what that revision was so I can make sure I have the most current documents? Because I pulled the ones from the website and it still says version 7. So I just want to make sure everything is lining up.
It's version 7, but the template should say 7.1. I think there was like I'm remembering it was like one word in one template where
Okay.
if someone read that word incorrectly, it could have led to a score of 2 on a section of the TPA, and we want to make sure we set folks up for success. And
Absolutely.
all these go through a lot of human hands. And unfortunately, I think Heather's nodding yes, because I think it was just like literally like one word in one section, right?
It really was. And I want to say it was in step 4, but
Yeah.
don't quote me on that. I think it
Okay.
was step 4. And it wasn't, it was only in multiple subject. It wasn't in ed specialist. Like
Okay.
it was correct in ed specialist and not in this one. Yeah. We do our best, guys. We really do.
We understand. Every year we say that with our handbook, and there's
Yeah.
always something.
So Marissa, are you saying that all of the templates for version 7 should have 7.1, even if it's not step 4? All of them now say 7.1?
They should, yeah, the most up-to-date ones that are available to you when you log in with your credentials and download that zip file. Yeah, and then when the candidates register, they get a version of the documents as well. They should all say 7.1.
Got it.
Sally.
So does this mean also then after the LPA in the spring, our multiple subjects candidates won't have to take the RICA anymore?
If you're participating in the LPA field test,
Yes.
the candidates, who are in the field test will receive a RICA waiver if they pass the LPA field test and meet that passing standard, but only the candidates in the field test.
Only in the field test, not every.
Yeah, only the ones in the field test.
Thank you.
I'm going to jump in on this 7.1 question. I've been actually downloading some zip files a little bit because we had a couple documents get out of whack, but I'm not seeing on the zip files where the cycle templates are. I'm not seeing any that say 7.1 at the bottom. It's always version 07. Are there?
So the only one I found that says 7.1 is Part K.
Okay.
Everything else, it looks like, so far, I haven't looked at everything, but so far everything else says version 7.
Okay. I just didn't know if that was documented on each of those templates or just the one. Thanks for clarifying.
I think the update just recently occurred, right, Heather? I think it was like.
I think it might have even been this week. I can pull up the email. Thank you, Alice, for pulling the template.
Yeah. Are there any other questions or anything else that you'd like to address to any folks here?
So when I completed the download of the slides, I noticed that one of the slides was missing the required support. Oh, it came up now, the required support slide 4, but I just tried it again and it uploaded. So thank you very much.
Perfect. And we'll be emailing out a copy of the slides to everyone here. And we're hoping to be able to put this recording on our YouTube channel. We're working on cleaning that thing up because we have a few different sessions on there that are helpful, and we want to make sure we get them organized and available to folks so that way they can support their candidates.
Thank you. Much appreciated.
Alice? Oh, no. Okay, Jude, sorry.
Yeah, hi. So one last question. I think so the LPA is a little bit different than the cycle 2, correct? So I'm assuming that we'll have another training over the summer when LPA goes live in fall 2025.
Yes.
So we'll have to change these materials again.
Yeah, lots of changes coming next summer, definitely. Yeah. And if you're curious about kind of what's coming. We did do some overview webinars this summer on what was in the pilot. I don't know if you all were able to attend those. Those are up on the YouTube channel. I'll drop those links in the chat also.
Yeah, and for what it's worth, I think the LPA is a little bit simpler than the Cycle 2. So liking those changes.
Yeah, in some ways, maybe. We've done a lot of work with our design team and with our staff. Marissa was on our design team before she made the jump over here to the staff. So we've done a lot with that. So I'll put those links in there, and yeah, lots of changes coming in 2025. So definitely we'll be doing a lot of support for everybody as we work towards shifting away from RECA and towards the LPA.
Great, thanks.
All right. Well, thank you very much for attending today. Really appreciate the conversation. And again, we'll send out a copy of the slides. And thank you to Merced County Office of Education for being so generous with their materials, and UC Merced as well, because it's a formative piece and they helped form me. So I'm a work in progress. So and do reach out to us anytime you need any support, questions, concerns. If you want us to take a look at some of the stuff you're doing and have a thought partner, we're always happy to be here, and each other, just check in with one another and be each other's, good support. We all have the same mission: preparing the best teachers, to better the state of California. And my kids are at school right now, and these teachers might be one of their teachers, so they better be good. All right. Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone.